Glad to know you're still there with us. And now to our big story for today is to look at the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. It's being called shortly VAPP. Now, this act was enacted in 2015 by former President Goodluck Jonathan. That was during his administration. And the essence of this act is to prohibit violence against persons, in the public and in the public space. Most importantly, it covers women and ladies. And now there are controversies trailing this act over the years since it's been enacted in 2015. If I as we speak, we only have 34 out of 36 states who have enacted this law or who have domesticated this law. And that's been a challenge over the year. And that's why we need to talk about it to see what can be done to reshape this act so that it can serve the purpose intended. Now, at the moment, there's a move to repeal this act at the Senate, but it's been kicked against mostly by women and ladies because they're going to be more affected. Let's see how we can shape policy in this regard by bringing in our guests. We're being joined by Juliana Jonathan-Omale, who is a lawyer and acting deputy director, Directorate of Gender-Based Violence, Kogi State Ministry of Justice. Glad you have you join us this morning, Juliana.
I'm grateful.
All right. For those who don't have proper understanding about this act, I would like you to give a background to the importance, the necessity, and the dictates or the spirit behind this act. We'll call it Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, VAPP. I would like you to give a background to it, why it's so important, and why do you think it's been controversial over the years? This act was enacted in 2015, and there are several controversies trailing this act, especially when it comes to protecting the interest of violence against women and ladies. So talk to us. The spirit behind this act and what has been the success rate, or if you call it the failure that has been recorded in the last years since it's been enacted, precisely in the year 2015.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to join you on this program. First of all, I would like to say that a lot of people have a misconception about what the VAPP law is all about in the first place. The VAPP law, which means Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015. This VAPP Act, the main thrust, the main purpose, the main objective of this VAPP Act is to prohibit all forms of violence, whether in the public or in the private life. It is also to provide some sort of, how do I put it now? The victims are supposed to be able to find solace in this law because it makes provision for the victims to be taken care of, and it makes provisions for the protection and the effective remedies to be provided for victims, which hitherto other laws before now had not been able to adequately do so. And then apart from that, it also is more detailed in terms of punishment for offenders for perpetrators or offenders, people who commit the gender-based violence. Now, in Nigeria particularly, the VAPP Act can be seen as one of the landmark achievements of the federal government of Nigeria in trying to combat the scourge of GBV. GBV is gender-based violence. Now, what is gender-based violence? Most people have a misconception. They don't even really know what it means. But if you go through the acts that amount or that constitute gender-based violence are listed there. Hitherto, because of our cultural practices and because of the gender roles that were assigned to the genders that are recognized in Nigeria, that's the male and female, you see that there were some things that were just seen as being normal, but have now been criminalized by the VAPP Act. So the VAPP Act is supposed to be a reprieve for those who have suffered one form of gender-based violence or the other. There are so many, but I'll give you an example. One of the most common and the most popular would be rape. But there is a misconception, like I keep insisting. People feel that it is only women and girls that are protected by this law, but it's not true. In fact, very recently, we had to visit a particular place for, I wouldn't want to mention where, but we were informed by someone who was visually impaired, a man, a male, a full-grown man. He told us that he was almost a victim of rape. So these things are everywhere. When we talk about the VAPP Act, most people just limit it. And I think that's the mindset that the average Nigerian has. Most people believe that the VAPP Act caters to just women and girls, but it's a misconception. It's for everybody. If there are some defects in the law to make maybe the male gender not feel really included, what I would suggest to be done should be an amendment and not a total overhauling of the legal framework for the GBV cases, because that would be a serious setback. What should happen? What do you think should become the fate of those who have been victims of gender-based violence? Or we like to refer to them as survivors. What should be their fate? So in my opinion, I would think that rather than asking for a repeal, what should be done should be an amendment. Even if you want to say another law should be enacted, it's going to be a lengthy process, lengthy and uncertain. And in the meantime, what of those who have benefited from the relief or the remedies that have been provided as a result of this law? Like you rightly pointed out, in Nigeria, about 34 states out of the 36 states of Nigeria have domesticated the law. The only issues we have, which I can point out, is the issue of implementation. Many of the states have domesticated this law, but we are not really implementing it as we should. And what I think the government can do for us is to try to strengthen the already existing VAPP Act. Strengthen it if there are areas of misconception or ambiguity, or if there are areas that need better clarification, an amendment should be done. But asking for a repeal will be like taking one step in the right direction and then 10 steps backward. Thank you very much.
All right. What a good opener there. Now let's bring in our second guest. It's looking like the conversation is getting bigger now, and it's looking like a day for lawyers to educate us. We're also being joined by Chimezie Onwuama Esquire, who is a senior partner and CEO, Million and Cross Commercial Solicitors. Glad to have you join us, Chimezie. You can hear. All right. While we wait for the second guest, Juliana, let me get back to you. You started by giving us a background to the spirit behind this law. Now, I'm happy with the fact that you are a legal practitioner, and from your observation over the years, this law was enacted in 2015. Will you give us a picture of the success rate, the level of implementation? How many Nigerians has implemented this law, has experimented with this law? And what are some of the controversies trailing this law? Why do you think, years after it was enacted, these laws are still being considered for repeal at the floor of the Senate? What are the controversial clauses here, and what are the things that should be submitted for amendment as far as the Senate is concerned?
Thank you for that question. Like I earlier pointed out, I think the issue of, sorry, I'm going to digress a bit, but I think it's for the purpose of clarity. The issue of sensitization is very important. I gave an example. I told you earlier, I said that there were many acts committed by people before now, which were not criminalized because of whether you could call them gender roles that are assigned traditionally. There are some things that are believed to be the prerogative of a man or even that of a woman and all that. And some of those things have kind of made people not realize that when we are talking about gender-based violence is neutral. Any gender can be a perpetrator of gender-based violence. What I mean is that a male can be a perpetrator of gender-based violence. That means a male can commit gender-based violence. A female can also commit gender-based violence. And that's the same way gender-based violence victims can either be male or female, young or old. So it cuts across all borders. That's the first thing people need to understand, because from my little experience in working in this department, I understand that a lot of men, it will surprise you to know that despite the plethora of gender-based cases that we have, it will shock you, the statistics of gender-based violence cases that we have in Nigeria. But despite it, there are some people who still have this notion. They still believe that once you just mention gender, anything gender, or you say gender-based violence, they just feel, oh, that caters to men. I mean, that caters to women and girls. And that's what I was talking about when I said we need proper sensitization. So going back to the question you just asked now, are there certain sections of the law that need to be amended? Yes, there are some that need to be strengthened. But in strengthening them, we don't overhaul the years of progress that has been made. That is why we can amend. We can pick out those sections, like the one that talks about the consent and the fact that men feel that by the language of the law, it caters more to, okay, let me give you an example. Some of the offenses, apart from, many people believe that, oh, it's only women that can be raped. But I just cited an example earlier. I said a visually impaired man told us he was almost a victim of rape. These are things that people are not aware of. Because men hardly report issues and instances of gender-based violence. Many men are silent on it, even when it is being committed. They are silent on it. Maybe they feel it emasculates them. I don't really know. But I would think that Nigerians should really be glad for the enactment of this act. And what we can do to strengthen it, like I said, what we can do to strengthen it is to have a complete look at the act itself and the areas that maybe they feel are not really inclusive. They don't really include both men and women, or the male and men and women, or the male and female gender. The language is just a matter of language, and they can just be adjusted. These things can be taken care of. You don't need to overhaul the whole legal framework. For me, it's a no-no. I'm of the opinion that we don't need to repeal the act at all, because even within this period of time that the act came into place, we can see the advantage and the fact that it caters more to specific things that were not provided for by the penal code and some things. There are some things that by the language of it and the how do I put it now? There are some crimes. Let me give you an example. If you say somebody is guilty of economic abuse, those are things that you could never find in the VAPP. I mean, you could never find in the penal code. But in the VAPP Act, you see things like that. That if you even deprive somebody of liberty, if you deprive somebody of sustenance, if the person is your dependent, it's an offense. It is a crime. So I would think that we should work on strengthening the already existing VAPP Act. A repeal for me is a no-no. It will be a waste of the time and the progress that has already been achieved in this regard. Thank you very much.
All right, you've made it clear that a repeal is a no-no for you. Now let's bring in our second guest. Alancha Chimezie is ready for us, who is a senior partner and CEO, Million and Cross Commercial Solicitors. Chimezie, glad to have you join us on the LX thing this morning.
So mine. And it's Milton and Cross, not Million and Cross, although we're expecting the millions.
All right, thanks for that correction. Of course, the millions will come. All right. Now let's
Amen.
look at this act. You have VAPP. It's been considered to be very controversial since 2015 that this act was enacted. Now, I would like you to give us your own picture, your own account on the success or the failure that has triggered this act. Why do you think years after we are still revisiting this act, even though the level of implementation has not been substantial? What are some of the critical controversies or issues that are trailing this law, this act, and what do you think should be done? Now, Juliana is saying she's kicking against the move to repeal the act. Let me have your thought in this regard, and then your overall assessment of this act.
Okay, thank you. My first interaction with the VAP law, the VAP legislation, was around 2016. I had a client whose husband woke up one day and threw her out of the house. He felt like, "Well, I don't want to marry this woman again. Leave my house." Packed her load, packaged her, and threw her out. As at that time, the VAP hadn't been domesticated in Lagos. It was just being domesticated. It hadn't taken full effect in Lagos State. And I think we have to distinguish between the VAP Act and the VAP law, Violence Against Persons legislation of the states. Now, the VAP Act covers only the FCT. It applies only to the FCT. If you understand the principle of conflict of laws, every state is a country in and of itself. So Lagos State is a different country from the FCT. FCT is a different country from Ondo State or your state, and so on and so forth. So each violence against persons law and legislation has to be domesticated in each state. Now, at that point, we could not really implement. You could only go to police, and you went to the police. Police would ask, "Oh, why did you not?" There were questions of adultery in the situation, and Nigeria, we have a tolerance. Unfortunately, attitudes are changing now, but about 10 years ago, there was a tolerance for domestic violence. There was a substantial amount of tolerance for domestic violence, economic violence, marital violence. There was a tolerance for it. If you got angry with your wife, you could just tell her, "Get out of my house." If you had a girlfriend and you've been living together for a while and you say, "I don't want to live with this woman again," you throw her out. You just stop taking care of your children. Attitudes have changed significantly. Now, people can do all with the enactment of the VAP and the domestication of VAP in other states, at least 35 out of the 6 states. The only state that hasn't domesticated it is Kano State. A lot of family-based and domestic violence has stopped, has reduced. I won't say it has stopped, but it has reduced. Yes, the VAP had its weaknesses. It does have a few weaknesses. But then if you look at the VAP alone in isolation, you will make a mistake. You have to look at the VAP vis-a-vis other existing legislations. Now, in Lagos, most people don't even really come under the VAP. Most offenses contained in the VAP are also covered by the criminal law of Lagos State. Let's use Lagos as an example. So, to a large extent, yes, the VAP has weaknesses, but most of the problems can be resolved through. It's actually being what Senator Issa Jibrin, that's the proponent of the promoter of this repeal law, the repeal bill, is saying is that let us repeal and reenact so we can fix all the errors in the VAP Act, which is not bad in and of itself. Most laws are repealed and reenacted every day. The KAMA was repealed and reenacted, and a better KAMA was enacted. most other laws, a lot of other laws, tax laws are, a lot of our laws are repealed and reenacted every day. But the VAPP, does the VAPP need an update? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. There are new issues surrounding cybercrime. People now, you have sex tips flying up and down. You have people sharing private issues surrounding privacy. Someone can blackmail you, cyberbullying, cyber blackmail. A lot of these things are issues that should be covered by the Violence Against Persons Act because they are emotional abuse. But on its own, does it need a full repeal? I don't think so. Now, even if they repealed the VAPP Act, I don't think it would actually have a substantial effect because it will only apply to the FCT. It will not apply to the other states until and unless the other states domesticate it. In terms of from what I also I've noticed over the years, I've observed, a part of my practice is dedicated to family and child law. And we've realized that prior to the VAPP Act, there was a prevalent belief that we used to call it gender-based violence or SGBV. We believe that women were the ones being abused. Now, information coming out, statistics show that there is men are more abused than women. We hear about men abusing women. We hear more cases of it, but when you now see statistics being released by the DSVRT and other domestic sexual violence agencies, you realize there's a substantial amount of violence against men. And unfortunately, our cultures, different cultures, Nigeria is made up of over 300 to 400 cultures. Different cultures make it difficult for men to come out and say, oh, we are being abused. What point does it, when men are often subject to emotional abuse. We hear a man being abused, you hear men. I had to have this neighbor, and by the time you hear his wife talk to him, she will strip him down with her tongue. Now, if the man goes to the police station and says, oh, my wife is emotionally abusing me, what happens? Everybody will abuse him and say, guy, go and be a man. Now, so man life be. So there's a tolerance for it in Nigeria. So I would say the issue with the VAPP Act is more one of enforcement and implementation. It's more of enforcement and implementation as opposed to the content. Because it's if you support the VAPP, if you look at the VAPP Act, Criminal Law, Children and Young Persons Act, and all that ecosystem that makes up child and family law, you see that it's substantial protection for children, young persons, and spouses. The VAPP Act then only covered, VAPP Act. Before the VAPP Act, there was the Criminal Code. Criminal Code covered rape. In fact, I just say the VAPP Act even tempered the harshness of the Criminal Code in some areas. Before, rape was 15 years. The punishment for rape was 15 years imprisonment. But then you had a higher standard of proof. You had to prove that there was penile entry. That's what you had to prove. Oh, this man actually had penetrative sexual intercourse with the woman. Any other thing was sexual assault. Now, the VAPP expanded the definition of rape to include digital rape, where a man uses his finger or his mouth or any other object to penetrate the woman. So a lot of things he expanded, but when it came to punishments, which is one of the issues Senator Issa Jibrin raised, he said, rape now has 15 years. Defilement, which is the rape of a child, a person under the age of 17 years, which they say is, I think, how many years is it? 13 or 11 years. It's short, much less. It has a lower punishment in the VAPP than in the criminal law. So the criminal law that covered is criminal or penal laws that covered each state provide a more robust architecture for enforcement of the VAPP. So you can actually, any offense that, so most times they punish people under the criminal law. So I don't think would the repeal have any substantial effect on the states? No. Except the states update their own laws to reflect repeal. But I think for what the law is, it's a repeal and reenactment. The issue I have noticed is the key issue, the core issue is that we don't have there's a trust deficit in Nigeria. People don't, a lot of the Nigerian populace do not trust the legislation, our legislative agents, bodies. One. And secondly, legislation, the National Assembly did not have, when they were first doing the first VAPP, the civil society organizations were carried along. A lot of people knew what was going on. It was a long process. People followed it step by step to the point of enactment. Now, this is being, this one is being, and this is not the first time Senator Issa Jubrin is bringing this request for, this request is sponsoring a bill to repeal and reenact the VAPP. It's not the first time. He came first in 2022. He was sent back. Now he has come a second time, and it has scaled to the second reading. So people, they are not carrying people along. We don't know the whys, we don't know the wherefores. So to my mind, there might be some hidden motives.
We'll address that subsequently, but let me, I like the fact that you've been able to provide the background to some of the things, the controversial issues as regards this act. But let's get back to Juliana, and I would like you to speak in this regard. Record has shown that out of 36 states in Nigeria, we only have 34 that has domesticated this law. Why do you think the other two are, foot dragging about domesticating this law? And what are some of the peculiarities about these states? Now, you talked about the peculiarity of Abuja and some other states. Do you think that the peculiarity of each state should be factored into this act when it's being domesticated? What are some of the issues around localizing this act, especially for the two states that have not been able to do that? What's your observation?
Well, I have an observation and I have a comment, but whether or not it's okay for me to express my personal opinion on national TV is another issue. The truth is that what is acceptable to some people may not be acceptable to others, and what is considered grievous and terrible to some people may not really be considered that serious. I want you to read between the lines and know where I'm heading to. I'm on national TV, so I just wouldn't want to go into saying some things, but I do know for a fact that whether we like it or not, in Nigeria, sometimes our religion or the things that we believe in, the things that we hold dear, they play a significant role in shaping who we are as a people, whether collectively or individually, or even as a state, what you hold dear. So for those who have domesticated the VAPP law, it is because they've seen the importance of it. And for the others the others that have refused to domesticate the law, it is because maybe or perhaps it is not that important to them, and maybe they feel, just like I pointed out earlier, the issue of sensitization cannot be overemphasized. The mindset of people need to change. People need to know that what is wrong, and nothing can make it right. Let's be sincere and be serious with ourselves. The issue of gender-based violence is even humanitarian in nature. It doesn't have to, it's not because it's happening to a man or it's happening to a woman. This is just basic. There are some things that are repugnant to natural justice, equity, and good conscience. So I think in the spirit of that, that's where we should channel, that's what should direct us to take the decisions that we take. The others are a bit slow in picking up the cue that the 34, or will I say 35 states have picked. But maybe, let's hope, maybe in the nearest future they will have a rethink. I would just love to stop here for now. Thank you so much.
All right, I understand your point and the angle you're coming from, but at least you've been able to shed light on that. Let me get back to Chimezie here. I like the fact that you're a man now, so we purposely had to arrange these. We purposely have to do this arrangement so that we'll have a kind of balance in the conversation. There was something crucial you raised earlier, which is the fact that when you talk about violence against persons, women and ladies are always in the picture. People hardly talk or think about men, but record or statistics are also shown that men are also victims. Now, what do you think can be done? You said earlier that most of the time, because of cultural belief or ego issue, men don't like to talk about it. Now, what do you think can be done to help victims who are men to voice out, to tell their testimony or their experience? Now that you have an ad that should be able to take care of that, don't you think there's a need to also look into this and also help these men who are victims, but they can't talk or they can't open up? What should be done to encourage these men to open up and tell their story?
It is a deep thing. I find that the major issue is that safe spaces are not created for men. Most people, when we have issues, we go to our churches, our mosques, our imams, or our families. There are no real safe spaces for men. I think the only safe space many men have are beer parlors, which is why you have a substantial amount of alcohol abuse. I think the first step would be to create more sensitization. A lot of men do not even know they are being abused. Secondly, the creation of a safe space where men can come and get counseling without judgment or condemnation. Number three, most of the government agencies need to, if I would say, I've had the opportunity of witnessing quite a number of cases, and the way it is carried out is, instead of carrying it out in a private and confidential manner, it's carried out in a public manner. So when I was in the UK, I spent some time in the UK, and I worked as a family mediator in the UK. And we were trained in techniques where you would have, if you wanted to talk to the husband, you talk to the husband separately, you talk to the wife separately. Before you now know where both of them are coming from. So most times when you had those separate conversations, you would find that people were willing to divulge more about what they were going through. But now in Nigeria, it's handled you would see people, they will lump people together, they call them together and say your own in front of the other person. Tell me your own side of the story, you tell me your own side of the story, they start fighting. So our cultural approaches, the way we have approached this problem over the years has only worsened the problem. So I think there's a need for more training among the functionaries that operate in that space. There's a grave deficiency of training. A lot of them are trained, but they don't know. They need to go through more practical and experience-based training. They need to learn how to mediate. They need to know how to caucus properly. They need to learn how to. Men need to have safe spaces. Counseling is important. A lot of men are going through when you as part of my divorce practice, I realized that when you sit down and talk to men, when you do a divorce for a man, when you do a divorce, you get close to the family. You start knowing their deepest secrets. And when you sit down, you see the load, the emotional load a lot of men bear. And you wonder how men are even sane. A lot of men are carrying mental health issues due to domestic violence, emotional abuse. I won't say violence now, I'll say abuse. So we need to have male spaces. Support groups need to be set up. There are inadequate support groups in Nigeria. Inadequate. I once had someone, I met a man whose wife would routinely beat him up. She would beat him up, she would injure him. You'd go to the police station, and she would go to the police station and report that he's the one beating her up. The man had until I got into the matter, the man had no safe space to talk. How do you tell your lawyer? How do you tell a man? How do you tell a fellow man that you are being beaten up by your wife? And a lot of, I would say a significant amount of women resort quickly to violence. When they have a quarrel with their husband, the first thing they do, they will just throw something at him, or they'll just slap him. And even in our home videos, you watch it in our home videos.
Let me pause you for a moment. I would like Juliana to react to this so that we'll strike a balance here. If you can hear me, Juliana, I would like you to react to this issue as regards perception when it comes to the issue of violence. Then let's also talk about the issue of stigma for the victims. We've established that the victims are also, we have both men and women who are victims. But you realize most of the time, the victims, they are always afraid to talk or to open up because of the stigma in the society, what might come after, especially when it comes to the issue of rape or domestic violence. Now, I'd like you to react to the angle that, gives the perception that when you talk about violence, women and ladies are usually in the picture, unlike men who are not in the picture. Then also talk about victims, the stigma in the society, how to handle the issue of stigma for victims who are going through all this and what they need to do, who they need to talk to, and how they can overcome this general perception about this act. Talk to us.
Thank you very much. Your question is, how do we handle the issue of stigmatization? And okay, let me start with how do we handle the issue of stigmatization? The truth is that there are some things you cannot help. When something has happened, it has happened. Rather, what should be done is how to encourage the person to come out of it and rise above the stigmatization. But I think even that issue of stigmatization will be handled. I'm still going back to the issue of sensitization. People need to be, we need to do, in Nigeria, we need to do a holistic, we need to address this issue of sensitization holistically. What do I mean? I mean both in the towns, in the villages, in the suburbs. Let it start from the grassroots. Let people know that, hitherto, before this time, these things were not considered bad, but now as it is, it has been criminalized and you can actually go to jail for it. I think when everybody knows that these problems are common to both the men and the women, the stigmatization will reduce. And I think it's even the stigmatization that makes it difficult for men to open up when they are being abused. My learned colleague mentioned that he's going to suggest that safe spaces be created for men to be able to vent. I don't really know.
All right, so we must apologize for that. The internet glitch won't, but I'm very sure we're going to get us soon for her to wrap up our talk on the issue of stigmatization. Okay, let me get back to Chimezie now. which is the factor why we wait for her to join us shortly. Now, I would like you to address the issue of evidence. You realize most of the time when you talk about the issue of violence against persons, the most important thing when it comes to approaching the court is the issue of evidence, which most of the time usually jeopardizes most of the cases in court. Issue of rape, domestic violence, and all that, it's usually not that easy to provide evidence. So, as a legal practitioner, what has been your observation in this area, and what should victims do, people who are being abused in one way or the other, to protect evidence? And immediately this thing happens, what would you expect victims to do? Are they in that position to secure these evidences or evidence or whatever it is that could also buttress their case in court? Talk to us about some of the mistakes people often make when it comes to handling this kind of case or approaching court for this kind of case in asking for their right or justice.
Thank you very much. The evidentiary burden in criminal matters is proved beyond reasonable doubt, which means that you must show that. I look at evidence. When you are building a case, you have to look at it like cooking a soup. There's a formula. A must enter, B must enter, C must enter, D must enter for there to be a clear-cut case. Now, so I will start. In order to prove a case of rape, you must prove that there was penetration, that you must prove that there was no consent, or consent was obtained through fraud or fraud. Number two, you must establish that. Now, how do you establish penetration? That's where we have always had a problem in rape cases, in proving rape cases. Back in the day, so you have to establish penetration is established a medical examination. So that is, and you can actually catch a person in Nigeria right now. Where you are most likely to get a person is when the man deposits semen inside the woman. That's where you have a clear case. But in situations where the man uses a finger, a tongue, any other part of his body, apart from penile penetration, we normally have consent is also a very hard case to prove, because there was a case I witnessed in court some years ago, many years ago. I was a very, very young lawyer then. And the man, they were able to win the case. The opposing counsel won the case. Then they asked the man, Oga, why did you, because there was no clear evidence. And the man said, oh, sometimes they were asking, why did you tear the girl's underwear? Why did you feel the need to tear her underwear? He said, sometimes you have, when a woman says no in Nigeria, it doesn't mean she will say no before she says yes. So that's where we don't have. So mistakes that are made. Let me start from the mistakes women make. Women typically make. Number one, if there's any issue of rape, do not shower. Do not have a shower. First thing, because they need to have, when the first thing the hospital does is when you go to the closest police station immediately, they will swab the woman. The police is under an obligation to call in a medical practitioner or a medical note to go to the closest general hospital. Now you take the general hospital, they will perform a rape kit on the woman. They will swab her vagina and find if there is a semen sample, or there are normally semen samples, skin samples. There are some samples the man will leave. They will get a medical report from the general hospital. Unfortunately, a lot of women, the first thing that a lot of women do is to go and have a shower because they feel dirty. After that effect, they will quickly go and have a shower and they try to wash away the man. They try to wash away the events. Now, doing that, they destroy that evidence. Now, the second thing the woman should do, so the first thing, don't shower. Don't shower, don't clean, don't do anything. Just dress up, go. Number two, document. Document. Take pictures. Take as many pictures. We memorize where things are happening. Take pictures if possible. If there has been beating, if a woman is beaten up, always take pictures of the violence. I find that when there are pictures, it always makes a very strong case. Because if there a woman, it covers the issue of lack of. You can say if a woman gave consent, there won't be a black eye on her face, or there won't be an injury, or there won't be abrasions. Now, number 3, the next thing the woman should do is ask for the human rights. When you get to the station, ask for the human rights officer in that station. Every station has a human rights officer. Those officers have proper training for human rights issues. They know the procedures and the steps to take. It may not be so in the rural stations. Some rural, unfortunately, sexual violence is more prevalent in rural areas and areas with low economic mobility. So they may not know these things. But the first thing I will say is don't shower. Once a woman showers, that the 99% is that the case will be scattered. If there's any exhibit, torn clothes, torn underwear, please carry it along. If the man used the condom, take it along. And then the third, what I find that women are now there's been more sensitization over the past 10 years. Women are more vocal about these things now. They are more educated about it and they're taking more reasonable steps. Before, women would just quickly shower, scatter evidence. Now, over the past 5 years, over the past 5 years, there's been a lot of, now women are smarter. You find that after sexual abuse, they tend to, I see a trend now, they lock the abuser in the house and go and report. Other times, if they are not careful, the woman should take steps to protect herself. Take pictures. Taking pictures, documenting.
Permit me to come in here now. You've been able to establish what should be done. Thank you for that. But let's bring in Juliana, and I hope she's ready for us. We also need to have a perspective as regards this development. Glad to have you back with us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Earlier, you were making your submissions as regards the issue of stigmatization, and also you made a statement that you don't subscribe to men being given a safe haven to vent their anger. So I'd like you to continue your thought in that regard, then subsequently I ask another question. But I want you to wrap up on that before we go to another question.
Okay, let me wrap up very quickly. I'm not totally opposed to men being given a safe space. What I just mean is that a safe space should be created for everybody, whether male or female. Yes, I'm in support of the safe space, but saying that the safe space should be for men because they are men and they are not used to venting is wrong. I think it's a wrong approach for you to even, there's nothing wrong with you. If you're a victim, you're a victim, and it's not because of something you did or did not do. You shouldn't be victimized because of your gender. And if you are victimized, you should be taught how to survive, how to come out of it. So I feel like I keep hammering. I know even if you are not going to remember me for anything, I want you to remember that I keep hammering on the issue of sensitization. When people know that these things are more common than they think, there's sometimes you're going through something and you just feel it's peculiar to only you. But surprise, surprise, only for you to discover that you're not the only man who has experienced such. Neither will you. You're not the first, neither will you be the last. So if you know that the statistics are now showing that even men suffer gender-based violence. Since you know that it's common now, the effect of that stigma will not be so much on you, especially if we can even create counseling centers where you can go to talk about it. Because once those counseling centers are established and they have people that you can confide in, the counselors that you can confide in, you don't necessarily need to know what I came in for. I may have come in because of being deprived of my liberty to do something. You may have come in because of rape. Whatever the case may be, everybody should be provided a safe space to vent. sometimes even venting about it, knowing that the government is concerned about you and is willing to do something concerning the GBV cases. I always tell people, sometimes when I do rape cases, I tell, there was a time, there was a little girl, a 14-year-old girl who was raped. And I remember the first time I met her, she was busy crying, even relaying what happened. Sometime, as in, it wasn't immediately it happened that I even met her. But just for her to relay the message, the story to me, she was crying. She couldn't even comport herself. And I remember there was one thing I told her. I called her name. I said, let me tell you, my dear, if you don't speak up in court today, what this man did to you, he will not only get away with it, he will do it to another person. Would you like that? She said no. And I tell you the truth, that was what gave the girl the confidence to open up. And she said it as it happened. And by God's grace, we won that case based on her testimony and based on the supporting evidence that we had. What am I trying to say? The issue of stigmatization, when something happens to you, it's not the end of the world. It's painful, but people should be taught to survive. People should be taught how to survive after that incident. We should not overdwell on it. And I feel that that stigmatization in itself will be taken care of when people are aware that these things are, they're happening, and government is making concerted efforts to ameliorate or to reduce them drastically in the society. Thank you very much. You were going to ask me another question.
All right, which will be a way for us to wrap up. My next question will be for you to have your closing remarks as regards this conversation. Now, I'm going to start with Juliana. We often say ladies first, so I'm going to start with that, and I'll get to you. Now, the Senate is making move, to reconsider this act, and there's every tendency that the move might be to repeal this act. You've made your point earlier, but let me put you on the spot. If you have been consulted as a lawyer, what will be your final recommendation or your recommendations as regards this move pertaining to this act? Let me have Juliana first, then I'll get back to Chimezie.
Okay, thank you very much once again. I said it earlier and I still maintain my earlier stand. An amendment will settle whatever is there, not necessarily a repeal. There's no need for that. There's absolutely no need. And I want, as part of my closing remarks, I want us to know that, please, everyone should disabuse their minds of the notion that gender-based violence caters to only, gender-based violence cases only, they're only, the law or the act, the VAPP Act only caters to women and girls. It is not true. Little boys are defiled every day. I can't even begin to tell you. Because of this directorate, this is the directorate, I work in the Directorate of Gender-Based Violence, Kogi State Ministry of Justice. In the bid to do this work, I know the stories and the things that we've had to listen to. So I just want people to disabuse their minds and to know that these things are happening, and we must join our hands together to put a stop to it. God helping us. Thank you very much.
All right, let me get to Chimezie now. Your closing thoughts or your closing remarks on this act as the Senate is considering a repeal. What do you feel?
But there is more need. They don't need to repeal the act. They should just expand its scope and deepen it. It's a fine piece of legislation. But there is more need for implementation, effective implementation, education, and sensitization. Out of every 10 sexual violence, domestic and sexual violence cases I see, 9 are settled due to stigmatization. So you find a situation where the victim is almost, I wouldn't say coerced, but is persuaded that, oh, look, if you go out and complain, you'll be stigmatized. Why not take some money and ease your pain. And unfortunately, it's Juliana works on this case from the government side. I have often worked on these cases from I would say sometimes on the side of the offenders. And we tend to just say, look, take some money and keep quiet. That's what tends to happen. So people find it a stigma. The stigma and the lack of education is the biggest problem. People need to we need to create more safe spaces. For as Juliana said, I agree with that, male or female, but the safe spaces should be attuned to the need of the person of that gender. I think the Senate are more concerned about what the logic behind the reason behind the repeal. I don't think it's timely. I think they should just focus more on education and sensitization and implementation. Let them leave the act for now. They don't know what they are doing. I don't think they know what they are doing. They are just talking rubbish. So they should leave the act.
All right, it might not be absolutely rubbish, but of course, like you said, there's a need to give room for amendment, and that's what they're looking at now at the moment. Well, we just have to leave this conversation here, and I must thank you both. You know, it is often said that variety is the spice of life. Having this kind of perspective from the two sides has also shed more light on this conversation. I'm almost turning to a law student this morning. Courtesy both of you, and I must thank you for sharing your thoughts, spending time with us. I hope Juliana, she's in view. Thank you so much for your time, and Chimezie, thank you so much for your submission on this act. We hope to have you subsequently when we have more development on this act. Thank you so much for spending time with us on Early Exchange this morning.
You're very welcome.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.